At 11:39 p.m. on January 27, 1986, less than 12 hours before launch, an engineer named Roger Boisjoly picked up a phone. He had spent the previous 6 hours on a conference call with NASA management, presenting data, charts, and a written recommendation. His conclusion was unambiguous: do not launch. But he was overruled. 73 seconds after liftoff, Challenger was gone. This is not a story about a malfunction. Malfunctions are random. They are unpredictable. They are nobody's fault. This is a story about a decision, and the decision had a paper trail. To understand what happened, you need to understand one component: a rubber ring. Specifically, a synthetic rubber ring approximately 1/4 of an inch thick and over 12 feet in diameter, seated inside the field joint of the Space Shuttle's solid rocket boosters. The solid rocket boosters are the 2 white cylinders attached to either side of the shuttle's external tank. They burn for approximately 2 minutes after launch, generating over 2 million pounds of thrust each. Inside them, solid propellant burns at approximately 5,600 degrees Fahrenheit. The field joints are where separate segments of the booster are connected during assembly. They are not welded. They are bolted and sealed. The seal, the component that keeps 5,600-degree combustion gases from escaping through the joint, is the O-ring. When the joint pressurizes at ignition, the O-ring is designed to seat, compressing against the metal surfaces and creating an airtight barrier. It works because rubber, under pressure, deforms to fill gaps. But rubber is temperature sensitive. When rubber gets cold, it loses elasticity. It becomes stiff. It takes longer to respond to pressure. And if the O-ring takes too long to seat, if there is even a fraction of a second of delay, hot combustion gases will pass through the gap before the seal is established. That is called blow-by. And it had been observed before, multiple times. The O-ring problem did not appear on January 28, 1986. It appeared in 1977. During qualification testing of the solid rocket booster field joint, engineers at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center identified a potential problem with joint rotation, a flexing under pressure that could compromise the O-ring seal. A report was written. It was filed. The shuttle program continued. The first shuttle flight was in 1981. By 1985, engineers at Morton Thiokol, the contractor that manufactured the solid rocket boosters, had accumulated data from multiple flights showing O-ring erosion. The hot combustion gases were reaching the O-rings and burning into them. Not through them, not yet, but into them. This erosion had been observed on STS-2 in 1981, on STS-41B in 1984, and on STS-51C in January 1985, the coldest launch to that point in the shuttle program, at 53 degrees Fahrenheit. That flight showed the worst O-ring erosion ever recorded. Roger Boisjoly examined that data, and in July 1985, he wrote an internal memo to his superiors at Morton Thiokol. He wrote, and I am reading directly from the document, "The result would be a catastrophe of the highest order, loss of human life." This memo was written 6 months before Challenger launched. It was received by management, it was acknowledged, and it did not stop the program. The shuttle flew 5 more times after Boisjoly's memo. Every flight with O-ring erosion was treated not as evidence that the seals were failing, but as evidence that they could tolerate erosion and still function. Sociologist Diane Vaughan, who spent years studying the Challenger decision, called this the normalization of deviance. The anomaly became the baseline. The warning became the background noise. The forecast for launch morning was 29 degrees Fahrenheit, 24 degrees colder than any shuttle had ever launched. 24 degrees colder than the flight that had already produced the worst O-ring erosion in program history. Roger Boisjoly and his colleagues prepared a data presentation for the teleconference. It showed every O-ring erosion incident plotted against launch temperature. The pattern was clear. Lower temperature correlated with worse erosion. At 29 degrees, the graph was projecting into territory where no data existed. No shuttle had ever launched that cold. they were extrapolating into the unknown. At approximately 8:45 p.m. on January 27, 1986, a teleconference began. On one end, engineers and managers at Morton Thiokol in Utah. On the other, NASA managers at Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama and Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Thiokol's engineering team, led by Roger Boisjoly and Arnie Thompson, presented their data and their recommendation. They recommended against launch below 53 degrees Fahrenheit. The forecast was 29. NASA's response, according to Roger's commission testimony, was not a technical counterargument. It was a challenge to logic, combined with a statement about schedule. George Hardy, NASA's Deputy Director of Science and Engineering at Marshall, said he was, and this is his word, appalled by the Thiokol recommendation. Lawrence Malloy, NASA's SRB project manager, said, "My God, Thiokol, when do you want me to launch? Next April?" The engineers had unanimously recommended against launch. NASA management had expressed that they were appalled by this recommendation. And at this point, Thiokol management asked for a 5-minute offline caucus. The caucus lasted 30 minutes. During those 30 minutes, Thiokol's senior managers, not the engineers, made a decision. They would reverse the engineering recommendation. Roger Boisjoly described what happened in that room in his Rogers Commission testimony. He said he made one final attempt. He placed photographs of O-ring erosion from previous flights in front of the managers. He said, "This is the actual hardware. These are the seals." No one responded to the photographs. Joe Kilminster, Thiokol's vice president for space booster programs, wrote a new recommendation. It stated that the data reviewed was inconclusive and that Thiokol recommended proceeding with launch. He signed it. He faxed it to NASA. Launch was approved at approximately 11:15 p.m. Roger Boisjoly went home. He could not sleep. There is one detail from the teleconference that Boisjoly returned to repeatedly in his testimony and in his lectures in the years that followed. At some point during the caucus, a senior Thiokol manager, Gerald Mason, turned to the most senior engineer in the room, Bob Lund, and said, "Take off your engineering hat and put on your management hat." Lund had been part of the unanimous engineering recommendation not to launch. After Mason's statement, he changed his vote. Those 8 words, "Take off your engineering hat," are the most precise summary of what went wrong on January 27, 1986. Not the rubber, not the cold temperature, not even the management pressure from NASA. The moment a room full of engineers was asked to stop thinking like engineers, the outcome became inevitable. Boisjoly said afterward that he had never felt so alone in his professional life as he did in that room. President Reagan appointed the Rogers Commission 5 days after the disaster. Its mandate was to investigate the cause and make recommendations to prevent recurrence. The Commission's most public moment came from physicist Richard Feynman, who brought a piece of O-ring material to a hearing, clamped it, submerged it in a glass of ice water, and demonstrated to the committee that the material lost its elasticity completely at low temperatures. He did this during a break, on camera, using materials he had purchased himself. He later wrote, "For a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled." The Rogers Commission report identified 2 failures. The first was the physical failure of the O-ring. The second, and the Commission spent more time on this one, was the failure of NASA's decision-making process. The report found that NASA managers had known about the O-ring problem since 1977. It found that launch constraint waivers, formal acknowledgements that a known problem existed but launch was proceeding anyway, had been issued repeatedly for the O-ring issue. It found that the people with authority to stop the launch did not have the information they needed to stop it, and the people who had the information did not have the authority to stop it. The system had been designed to route safety concerns upward. The culture had made raising those concerns professionally costly. Challenger lifted off at 11:38 a.m. on January 28, 1986. The launch appeared normal. The high-speed cameras captured something the naked eye could not see. In the first 0.678 seconds after ignition, 8 puffs of grey smoke appeared from the right solid rocket booster's aft field joint, the exact joint that Boisjoly had flagged. What happened in those first fractions of a second was this: the O-ring had not seated. Combustion gases blew past the primary O-ring, past the secondary O-ring, and burned into the joint insulation. The insulation then temporarily sealed the gap. For 58 seconds, the joint appeared to hold. At T plus 58 seconds, aerodynamic forces and wind shear hit the shuttle during ascent. The forces flexed the joint. The temporary seal broke. At T plus 64 seconds, a plume of flame appeared from the right SRB lower field joint. At T plus 72 seconds, the flame reached the liquid hydrogen tank of the external tank. At T plus 73 seconds, Challenger broke apart. All 7 crew members were lost. Roger Boisjoly left Morton Thiokol in 1986. He spent the remainder of his career as a lecturer on engineering ethics, focusing on the obligation of engineers to speak when they see a risk, and on the obligation of organizations to listen. On February 1, 2003, 17 years after Challenger, the Space Shuttle Columbia broke apart during re-entry. The cause was a piece of foam insulation that had struck the leading edge of the left wing during launch, damaging the heat shield. The Columbia Accident Investigation Board reached a conclusion nearly identical to the Rogers Commission. The foam strike problem had been observed on previous flights. Engineers had raised concerns. Those concerns had not reached decision makers. The schedule had taken precedence over unresolved safety questions. The technical failure was different. The organizational failure was the same. NASA had fixed the O-ring. It had not fixed the culture. Because of the Challenger disaster, every human spaceflight program now requires written descent procedures, a formal mechanism allowing any engineer to place a documented objection into the official record, regardless of management's position. That requirement did not exist on January 27, 1986. Every disaster we cover on this channel has a version of this moment, a warning that was observed, documented, and set aside. The technology fails last, the decision chain fails first. The next case is a dam. In 1963, a mountain moved into the reservoir, and 2,000 people in the valley below had no warning. That breakdown is next.